I invite you to join me in exploring this pattern by Oakwood Knits. I found their patterns to be truly beautiful. I hope you're going to check them out. I don't know them personally, but I really enjoyed discovering their sock patterns for the 4 seasons. And I invite you in this series of videos to join me in learning how to read a sock pattern. I will be knitting a pair of socks inspired by this pattern. I will make some changes and adjustments from the pattern that they made to help you see how you can do the same. But I also wanted you to know the pattern that inspired this video. And the yarn I'm going to be using is Palette by Knit Picks. The colors we start with are this beautiful yellow and blue shade, Semolina yellow, and Wonderland heather. Now, her pattern calls for 2.25 millimeter and 2.5 millimeter knitting needles, but I am, after testing my tension, I am going to use 2 millimeter needles and 2.5 millimeter needles. So if you're using the same yarn, you may want to test the gauge, of course, and join me in knitting a pair of socks inspired by this pattern while we learn to read this pattern. So you will see in her pattern, she did beautiful colorwork charts. And you first, of course, on any sock pattern, you want to read the information that the designer provides for you. So here we see sizes and gauge and materials and yarn. So after doing this gauge, I realized that for my tension, I should really use 2 millimeter needles and 2.5 millimeter needles, a little thinner than she uses here for the cuff. Okay, then you want to use the comparable yarn. If you're not using the yarn that is called out in the designer's pattern, then you will want to use comparable yarn. So just pay attention to that. Before moving forward, you want to take some measurements of your foot. You want to decide on a size. So after taking my measurements, I realized that I want to work on a medium for the number of stitches for foot circumference, but then the length will need to be adjusted and measured as I work. So I'm going to work with medium because foot circumference is really about counting the stitches. And once you know that, now to give you a sense of these videos, if you're following along with me and you're working on medium, you are going to get a sock that will fit your US shoe size 8.5 to 10. That will help you know what's going to happen if you're using the same needles I'm using and the same yarn I'm using, and making the same adjustments that I'm going to make as we work. Now here she has a very beautiful detailed explanation on some tips and notes that can help you. We're going to skip that for right now. This is another thing you want to look at before you proceed: abbreviations. What are the abbreviations the designer is using so that you know what you are expected to do for that part? What I like to do is pull this part out to the front of my work pattern. If you're working in a book, I like to put a little post-it note there to bookmark this page because you will want to quickly refer to it when you need to. Now in this video, we're going to read the directions for cuff and we're going to get started with that. I told you I'm going to work on the medium size of the sock, shoe size 8.5 to 10, US sizes, and I'm going to cast on 72 stitches. We are working on this from top down, not from toes up. On my channel, you can see variations of both approaches, we're going to follow this pattern, and we start with casting on here and working top down. So this video will introduce you to casting on, reading the portion just for the cup. All right, so let's see. The abbreviation CO means cast on. Cast on this number of stitches. I like to circle it to make sure I'm following throughout. You see here, I circled wherever the size for medium sock size matters. Then it says distribute stitches evenly over 2 needles for magic loop. Now, I'm not going to use magic loop because I really enjoy working with double pointed needles. And if you are using magic loop, you can definitely follow along still and know what to do. But if you are using double pointed needles, it's going to make much more sense to you. Then we're going to join the working round, and we're gonna be careful not to twist the stitches. And then she says PM. We look at abbreviations. PM means place marker. We place marker for the beginning of round. That helps us keep track and not just work through losing track, but we can also count, which I will show you how to do. We are going to work in 2-2 rib. This 2-2 rib means, here is techniques, 2-2 rib. It means knit 2, purl 2 all the way around. For medium size, it's about 1.5 inches. Now I am going to change this and I will make it 2 inches. She says approximately 15 rounds. We're going to measure and stop when we have 2 inches. All right, here we go. 72 stitches. We're going to start with this beautiful blue shade. I really enjoy the feel of this yarn by Knit Fix Palette. Wonderland Heather is this color. It's also the color that the designer chose to start with on this sock design. So I am not changing that. Now I like to find the end. It's always like a little bit of a treasure hunt. Here it is. All right, here we go. Casting on 72 stitches on thinner needles. Like I said, I've adjusted after testing the gauge to 2 millimeter. So I have 2 millimeter double pointed needles. I have a set of 5. I'm going to start with 2, and I'm going to cast on 72. I will use for this cast on this method. We're going to put on 2 stitches as if we were going to do long tail cast on. So take a look at what I'm doing here. I started as if I'm going to do the long tail cast on, but I don't turn it around. I let the 2 loops be on top like this. Now I'm going to take 1 needle out. I have these 2 loops, and I'm going to get a stitch in between the 2 loops and put it back on. You can use your favorite cast on method. I will use this one for this design. Now the next stitch comes between these 2, and I put it onto the needle, and again I put my needle between, get the next stitch and put it on, between, get the next stitch, oops, get the next stitch and put it back on. Your needle goes between, so you're not going through the loop, you're going between. You can see what's happening here. I'm going to count 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 11. Every time I get a new stitch, I put it onto the needle. I go with the next, I go between the first 2 stitches, grab yarn, bring it up, put it onto the needle. It may look confusing, but after a few tries, you're going to get your rhythm. 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 2, 4, 6, 8, 9. One more, and I will have 20. Remember, you go between the first 2 stitches on your needle, between, not through any stitch. You grab it, you pull through, oops. Sometimes you'll have to start again, and now you put the stitch on. Between the first 2 stitches on your needle, grab the yarn, pull through, come to the needle. Make sure that when you're doing this, you are not keeping things too tight. They shall be all even, but not too tight. I have 30, I need 72. Between the first 2 stitches on my needle, grab the yarn, bring through, put the stitch onto the needle, between, We are at 41. Now 42, we need 30 more. Keep doing the same thing. Between the first 2 stitches, grab the yarn, fall through, and put it on. Let's count our stitches. As we count, we want to make sure things are not twisting around. 71, 72. We're now ready to start our round while transitioning to other needles. 72 to evenly distribute it onto 4 needles. We need 18 on each needle. And remember, our pattern said that we need to work in a 2-2 rib, which means 2 knit, 2 purl. So I take the first needle and I start with knit 1, 2, purl, 1, 2. That is 4 stitches. I need 18 on this needle. Knit, knit, purl, purl. 1, 2, 3, 4. This is 18 stitches. My last 2 stitches were 2 knits. That means when I start needle number 2, I have to start with 2 purls and get 18 stitches on it. Carrying my 2 purl, 2 knit. I have 18 stitches. My 2 last are 2 purl. So the next needle I start with 2 knit. I need 18 stitches on it. This is 18 on my needle number 3. I have 1 more to do. The last 2 which were 2 knit. I need to do 2 purl at the beginning of the next one. Now we distributed the stitches and we worked the first round that we now have to close. So we put all our needles down and we make sure that there are no twists, that nothing is twisted up. So you see how this is sticking up and all the sides are down on other needles. So I'm going to pull that down. There we go. This, if you're doing it for the very first time with such thin needles, is what sometimes people worry about doing. But with a little bit of patience and a little bit of exercise for your fingers, you're going to find that it's not very difficult. All right, so now I make sure there are no twists. Everything is nice and even and on the same side. And now I take my fifth needle in the working yarn and I start my tutu rib one more time around. We will pull this very tight. This tail I pull down, throw pearls. As you switch to the next needle, always double check and make sure that nothing is twisted around, and pull here the first stitch of each needle tight. Now I go to needle number 3 and make sure nothing's twisting around. The first stitch is knit and you pull tight to avoid the gaps between the needles. Okay, and go to the next needle. I see how this wanted to twist around. I have to make sure that it doesn't. I pull it down. Nothing twisted here. at the next round finished. Pull this. Everything is twisted, starting to shape up beautifully. Now we're going to knit this for the length of the cuff that we want. The pattern we read calls for 1.5 inches, approximately 15 rounds. I am going to make it 2 inches on my socks. You decide how long of a cuff you want and enjoy having on your socks. And once our cuff is finished, we will go to the next part of the pattern. So let's work. Do not worry about this little gap here. I will teach you later in the finishing stages how to close it using a sewing needle. So you want to make sure this tail is not too short so that you can thread the needle and create a stitch closure and weave in the end. You can see how it's looking. Very lovely pattern of the rib, 2-2. The standard color doesn't show it up a lot, but you can see how stretchy it is. And here you can see why I like to use this type of cast on when I work from top. It follows the shape of the rib and is more stretchy than the long tail cast on. So I hope you'll enjoy learning this way of casting on and using double pointed needles. When we finish the cuff, we move on to the next part.